Hello, everybody. This is Antonio Wolf, continuing Franz Kafka's The Trial. We are on Chapter 3. We left it halfway last time, so we'll finish it this time. If you don't know at what point we are using the Muir, Willa Muir translation, which I never mentioned, but it's not that hard to find out. For those of you who randomly start listening here for whatever reason, here's something to catch your attention. Joseph K. is guilty. If you want to know why, start from the very beginning. Trust me on that. Alright, so we're starting halfway through Chapter 3. We're on the PDF that we're at. We're at page 34. Last time we left Kay meeting the usher of the court where he had his first hearing. And what is it? They had a little bit of conversation. If you want to find out about that, just go back and read it yourself or listen to us read it as well and comment on it. Some important stuff, but if you actually care about important things, you wouldn't be starting here in the middle of things anyways, would you? So let us get started. At the entrance, he, Joseph K., nearly fell over as behind the door there was another step. They don't show much concern for the public, he said. They don't show any concern at all, said the usher. Just look at the waiting room here. It consisted of a long corridor from which roughly made doors led out to the separate departments of the attic. There was no direct source of light, but it was not entirely dark, as many of the departments, instead of solid walls, had just wooden bars reaching up to the ceiling to separate them from the corridor. The light made its way in through them, and it was also possible to see individual officials through them as they sat writing at their desks or stood up at the wooden frameworks and watched the people in the corridor through the grabs. There were only a few people in the corridor, probably because it was Sunday. Would that be surprising in this case? I mean, that'd be... Well, no, yeah. I actually don't know anything about courts, so why would Sunday... Well, Sunday would be a weird day for courts to be running anyways. I don't think courts even run on Sundays.
They can't run on Saturday, that's the Sabbath.
No, that's true in Jewish...
Right.
Maybe something to that. Yeah, sure. So you'd expect them more to be more on weekdays, but not by people who are the defendants, because I mean, those people have. You think those people have jobs or something, which they do. So why would it be more surprising for them to be there on Sunday? Because like the reason they told Kay that his hearings and stuff would be on Sunday is because you got a job and you're a busy guy, so it's only after you probably have a Sunday. So for your convenience, we'll have you come in on Sunday.
Sure, yeah. Didn't he expect it to be on Monday? Or was that something else? I remember he was like, oh, it must be on Monday.
I don't remember about that one.
Yeah, maybe I'm mixed up in my mind.
At least, if it was mentioned at all, it would be there at the beginning of Chapter 2 when he gets the summons.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess it makes sense that there are only a few people.
Yeah, anyways, that's just kind of a superficial point. Well, I guess something to be said is the fact that they don't have solid walls is probably has a double meaning. Immediately what I think of is one, to get another show that the court is far less interested in material things, so why would they spend money on walls? It's a fucking attic, so it's just like the beams he's talking about are literally the beams that support
right
the roof.
This is a residential area, part of the city.
Yeah. So and the other one is it's public transparency. You can literally look into the office and just watch them work. But they can also watch the defendants, who are out there and see what they're doing. So it kind of has a double function. Anyway, let's move on. The light made its way in through them, and it was also possible to see individual officials through them as they sat writing their desks, blah, blah, blah. There were only a few people in the corridor, probably because it was Sunday. They were not very impressive. They sat equally spaced on 2 rows of long wooden benches, which had been placed along both sides of the corridor. Now, why would he would think a bunch of defendants would be impressive? I don't know why.
They're not there to impress him. Okay? They're not there to impress him.
I mean, who does he expect to see? Like, the fucking top class people of the world, or what? They're not all scum and dirty like him.
He needs aristocratic arbiters to deal with his case, because he's important in his mind.
Yeah,
We've established this, but, just to refresh the memory. Not yours, but the audience's memory.
So they were not very impressive. They sat equally spaced on 2 rows of long wooden benches which had been placed along both sides of the corridor. All of them were carelessly dressed, although the expressions on their faces, their bearing, the styles of their beards, and many details which were hard to identify showed that they belonged to the upper classes. So they're not impressive. He expects more high-class people. Then he notices, he says they're carelessly dressed, but he also notices that something's telling that these people are like him. They're from the upper classes. They're high society people.
They're part of the smart
carelessly.
They're
carelessly
not dressed
dressed.
smartly. Yeah.
There's probably a lot of things that could be interpreted of that. One of them may be that this would be an appearance thing, just like you remember the painter thing that the examining magistrate asked him, so you're a house painter, and the whole laughing thing happened. Maybe they actually see him as a shabby dressed person, despite the fact that he thinks he's always on his toes with regards to that. Although when you actually think about it, the way he has treated his whole thing since the very beginning probably indicates that he himself looks shabbily dressed. Because you remember in chapter 1, when he was going to see the first, the investigator that first heard him in the one lady's apartment. He was going to go and see him just in his sleeping clothes, shabbily dressed, and they're like, well, how are you going to go see in his, an official of the court like that? That's what the arresting officers told him. No, you got to wear a coat, and it's got to be black, and
it has to be black. And he didn't bathe, remember?
Yeah, he didn't bathe. So he's probably a shabby-looking motherfucker too, and he doesn't notice it. And
so it's the style of their beards and many other details. It doesn't say other, but many details which were hard to identify showed. It doesn't elaborate, but it's other things. They're clues that they're not just what they appear to be on the surface. There are details about them that make them not what they seem. Just a cursory glance.
Yeah. Another thing is you might, just as he thought that that by making himself less presentable to the court, that he was kind of being defiant of them and getting one up on them. Maybe all these people think the same way. Who knows? Although we will see that that might not be the case. They wore. There were no coat hooks for them to use, and so they had placed their hats under the bench, each probably having followed the example of the others. When those who were sitting nearest to the door saw Kay and the usher of the court, they stood up to greet them, And when the others saw that, they also thought they had to greet them, so that as the two of them went by, all the people there stood up. None of them stood properly upright. Their backs were bowed, their knees bent. They stood like beggars on the street. Kay waited for the usher, who was following just behind him. Excuse me. They must all be very dispirited, he said. Yes, said the usher. They are the accused. Everyone you see here has been accused. Really, said Kay. They're colleagues of mine, then. And he turned to the nearest one, a tall, thin man with hair that was nearly gray. What is it you are waiting for here? Asked Kay, politely. But the man was startled at being spoken to unexpectedly, which was all the more pitiful to see because the man clearly had some experience of the world and elsewhere, would certainly have been able to show his superiority and would not have easily given up the advantage he had acquired. Here, though, he did not know what answer to give to such a simple question, and looked around at the others as if they were under some obligation to help him, and as if no one could expect any answer from him without this help. Then the usher of the court stepped forward to him, and in order to calm him down and raise his spirits, said, The gentleman here is only asking what it is you're waiting for. You can give him an answer. The voice of the usher was probably familiar to him, and had a better effect than Kay's. I'm waiting, he began, and then came to a halt. He had clearly chosen this beginning so that he could give a precise answer to the question, but now he didn't know how to continue. Some of the others waiting had come closer and stood around the group. The usher of the court said to them, Get out of the way, keep the gangway free. They moved back slightly, but not as far as where they had been sitting before. In the meantime, the man whom Kay had first approached had pulled himself together and even answered him with a smile. A month ago, I made some applications for evidence to be heard in my case, and I'm waiting for it to be settled. You certainly seem to be going to a lot of effort, said Kay. Yes, said the man. It is my affair, after all. Not everyone thinks the same way as you do, said Kay. I've been indicted as well, but I swear on my soul that I've neither submitted the evidence nor done anything else of the sort. Do you really think that's necessary? I don't really know, exactly, said the man, once more totally unsure of himself. He clearly thought Kay was joking with him, and therefore probably thought it best to repeat his earlier answer in order to avoid making any new mistakes. With Kay looking at him impatiently, he just said, As far as I'm concerned, I've applied to have this evidence heard. Perhaps you don't believe I've been indicted, asked Kay. Oh, please, I certainly do, said the man, stepping slightly to one side, but there was more anxiety in his answer than belief. You don't believe me, then? Asked Kay, and took hold of his arm, unconsciously prompted by the man's humble demeanor, and as if he wanted to force him to believe him. But he did not want to hurt the man, and had only taken hold of him very lightly. Nonetheless, the man cried out as if Kay had grasped him Nonetheless, the man cried out as if Kay had grasped him not with 2 fingers, but with red-hot tongues. Shouting in this ridiculous way finally made Kay tired of him. If he didn't believe he was indicted, then so much the better. Maybe he even thought Kay was a judge. And before leaving, he held him a lot harder, shoved him back onto the bench, and walked on. These defendants are so sensitive, most of them, said the usher of the court. Almost all of those who had been waiting had now assembled around the man who, by now, had stopped shouting, and they seemed to be asking him lots of precise questions about the incident. Kay was approached by a security guard, identifiable mainly by his sword, of which the scabbard seemed to be made of aluminum. This greatly surprised Kay, and he reached out for it with his hand. The guard had come because of the shouting and asked what had been happening. The usher of the court said a few words to try and calm him down, but the guard explained that he had to look into it himself, saluted and hurried on, walking with very short steps, probably because of gout. So a scabbard made of aluminum. It's probably meaningful. It's definitely symbolic. I mean, what are the usual symbolic things? Gold, silver.
Yeah.
So aluminum's like a cheap knockoff of silver.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, I don't know. Not much to comment on, besides yet again K being K, being an asshole and being selfish, and making everything about himself. He's judging silently the other defendants, talking about mentally about how shabby they are when they stand up. He assumes they stand up for him. And he, as if there's nobody else that could possibly be whom they're standing up for. It's not like he's walking with the usher behind them. They don't know who he is. And he's like, oh, they might think I'm a judge because I'm finely dressed or whatever. Despite the fact that he probably looks like just as much of a sob as they do. Ask the man a question about why he's there. The guy just gives him a simple answer. He's just putting in a petition. And out of nowhere, like, Kay gets pissed off at him and just says, you don't believe that I'm indicted? And the guy says, oh, well, I do. And he's like, no, I don't think you do. And he gets mad at him. Like, this whole time, he's like, I'm not guilty, I'm not guilty, I'm not guilty of anything. And here he's like getting mad that people don't believe that he's been indicted. And then he plays it off as like, oh, well, if he doesn't believe me, all the better. Maybe they think I'm a judge. Ridiculous.
It's like that joke Derrida told where the rich people are like, oh, I'm nothing, Lord. And then, a poor person comes in and says, I'm nothing, Lord. And the rich people are like, who is he to say he's nothing, The same as who's this guy to be indicted and not believe I'm indicted? Yeah. I don't know. The aluminum thing, all I can think is, it looks fake. Like a scabbard of a sword be made of aluminum. That's about it. I can't find any symbolism. I've looked. Really?
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is like it's knockoff silver. I mean, aluminum looks like silver, but it's just knockoff.
Yeah.
Other things to talk about in this paragraph. The fact that, it seems these people are older than he is. They're also high class.
Mm-hmm.
They're waiting around.
Implying that they've been there a long time, I guess?
Yeah, they've probably been on trial for a lot longer than he has. And it seems that the trial has broken them to a certain point.
Right.
He mentions that he could tell that were they in the outside world, they would be like him and they would be proud and self-confident and, they'd boss people around as according to their station. But here they have been completely broken and cowed. They can't even answer a basic question to a stranger.
And they weren't expecting to have to. They were just waiting around.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible that they haven't been waiting a long time this time, and they... Well, I don't think it's said yet, but I guess this is a spoiler, but, that you can have your case temporarily solved and then have to come back at any time. So, possible that they came back. And haven't been there.
Yeah, that's like...
That's in
three chapters away. But, and when I've rethought about that chapter is definitely one of the top chapters for me. It is extremely symbolic. Well, this whole book is extremely symbolic, but like that one, the symbolism is perfect. One of the peaks. Because a certain set of things will come forth, which I think are superficial diversions that are supposed to that if you're not in on what's going on, you're going to fall for it, and you'd never be the wiser. We'll get to it. So let's continue. So Kate didn't concern himself long with the guard or these people, especially as he saw it turning. Actually, let me read that little section on the guard, because maybe there's something to say there. So none of those men cried out. Oh yeah, like here there's probably a double misunderstanding. One, Kay probably underestimates how hard he grabbed that guy. But what the usher says about them, like, oh, these guys are so sensitive, about everything. These defendants are so sensitive, most of them. So the guy he grabbed probably is overplaying how hard he was grabbed too. The same way Kay overplays how badly all this is for him. Remember his hearing, like when he was arrested at first, it was just kind of a weird thing. Not the usual legal proceedings, but it wasn't anything terribly violent or off-putting. Physically, at least. And then when he goes to the hearing, he plays it up as like, oh, this was this great horrible thing, they harassing him and blah blah. So same thing. Kay did worse than he thought he was doing, but the guy took it worse than it actually was. So before leaving, he held him a lot harder, shoved him back onto the bench, and walked on. And that's just being completely mean for no reason. These defendants are so sensitive, most of them, said the usher of the court. Just kind of egging on Kay in this. Yet again, entrapment, I think. Just to see what Kay does. Almost all those who had been waiting now assembled around the man, who by now had stopped and shouted. They seemed to be asking lots of precise questions about the incident. You might think that they care about this guy, like, oh, where did he hit you? I don't think so. You'll find out that a lot of these people are obsessed with their trial, and they take the weirdest things to be deeply meaningful and related to their trial. So Kay was approached by a security guard, identifiable mainly by his sword, of which his scabbard seemed to be made of aluminum. This greatly surprised Kay, and he reached out for it in his hand. Now this is weird and stupid, because
it doesn't say he grabbed it.
Yeah, but the fact that you reached out for it, why would you do that? Why would you reach for the weapon of the guard? I mean, I just gotta tell you, in the U.S., U.S., especially if you're not white, that will definitely get you killed.
In any of those old, night shows or whatever, somebody reaches for your sword. Same thing.
Yeah. But
it never says he does grab it. It just says he reached out for it. I don't know what the German says.
It's one of those things that just kind of like an attraction. The same way that he's just like inexplicably attracted to women in the court. This kind of inexplicable attraction is like, hey, this is made of aluminum.
Hey, shiny thing.
Aluminum is a knockoff silver. K is a knockoff aristocrat of the soul.
Aluminum is shinier than silver as well.
That is true.
I don't know.
Definitely.
But I just think he didn't believe it was real. He was like reaching out for it to see if it's real. I don't know if he grabbed it. What does it say?
So this greatly surprised Kay and reached out for it with his hand. The guard had come because of the shouting and asked what had been happening. The usher of the court said a few words to try and calm him down, but the guard explained that he had to look into it himself, saluted and hurried on, walking on with very short steps, probably because of gout. So, I mean, in any situation of, like, what's happening here, whatever the usher told him, we don't know. It seems he didn't tell them about Kay, because then you'd think that if he's like, oh, well, sorry, Kay just kind of grabbed this guy a bit too hard and pushed him back onto the bench, which is assault, but whatever. And the guard's like, well, let me look into it myself. Does not tell Kay, wait here while I go and figure this out and find out from the other guy what was going on, and then come back to you. It just completely ignores Kay, moves on. Yet again, an example of the court letting Kay get away with breaking rules and seeing what he's going to do. Is he going to do the right thing, or is he going to play it off and move on? Clearly, in this case, he just played it off and moved on. Which is normal, I suppose. I'm the kind of person who would, even if they didn't tell me, wait around, I would wait around, because I do, feel guilty about those things. Even if I may not feel guilty, I just want to know that things are straight and resolved before I move along. Especially if I know I caused something to do with it. But that's just me. So Kay didn't concern himself along with the guard or these people, especially as he saw it turning off the corridor about halfway along it on the right-hand side, where there was no door to stop him going that way. He asked the usher whether that was the right way to go. The usher nodded, and that is the way that Kay went. The usher remained always 1 or 2 steps behind Kay, which he found irritating, as in a place like this, it could give the impression that he was being driven along by someone who had arrested him, so he frequently waited for the usher to catch up, but the usher always remained behind him. In order to put an end to his discomfort, Kay finally said, "Now that I've seen what it looks like here, I'd like to go." "You haven't seen everything yet," said the usher ingenuously. "I don't want to see everything," said Kay, who was also feeling very tired. "I want to go. What is the way to the exit?" "You haven't got lost, have you?" asked the usher in amazement. "You go down this way to the corner, then right down the corridor straight ahead as far as the door." "Come with me," said Kay. "Show me the way. I'll miss it. There are so many different ways here." "It's the only way there is," said the usher, who had now started to sound quite reproachful. "I can't go back with you again. I've got to hand in my report, and I've already lost a lot of time because of you as it is." "Come with me," Kay repeated, now somewhat sharper, as if he had finally caught the usher out in a lie. "Don't shout like that," whispered the usher. "There's offices all around us here. If you don't want to go back by yourself, come on a bit further with me, or else wait here till I've sorted out my report. Then I'll be glad to go back with you again." "No, no," said Kay. "I will not wait, and you must come with me now." Kay had still not looked around at anything at all in the room where he found himself, and it was only when one of the many wooden doors all around him opened that he noticed it. A young woman, probably summoned by the loudness of Kay's voice, entered and asked, "What is it the gentleman wants?" In the darkness behind her there was also a man approaching Kay, looking at... let me just read that. In the darkness behind her there was also a man approaching Kay. Okay, sorry. That's just the grammar. That's just so weird, because they always put a period next to Kay. In the darkness behind her there was also a man approaching. Kay looked at the usher. He had, after all, said that no one would take any notice of Kay, and now there were 2 people coming. It only needed a few, and everyone in the office would become aware of him and asking for explanation as to why he was there. The only understandable and acceptable thing to say was that he was accused of something and wanted to know the date of his next hearing. But this was an explanation he did not want to give, especially as it was not true. He had only come out of curiosity, or else an explanation even less usable. He could say that he wanted to ascertain that the court was as revolting on the inside as it was on the outside, and it did seem that he had been quite right in his suspicion. He had no wish to intrude any deeper. He was disturbed enough by what he had seen already. He was not in the right frame of mind just then to face a high official such as might appear from behind any door, and he wanted to go either with the usher of the court, or if needs be, alone. So yet again, weirdness. K feels lost despite the fact that all he's done is go down one corridor, turn right, stop somewhere along that corridor, and says, "I want to go back." And then the guy's like, "Well, just then go back then. It's just straight down. Then go to the other corridor all the way to the door." And he says, "But I might get lost. There's so many like doors here." He hasn't come through any doors. He's literally just gone down corridors. This is a case of, to me, this is can be interpreted as, on two levels, as a case of his myopic view of things, that he gets really tunnel visioned, where like he literally is incapable of seeing right what is like two steps ahead of him. Like it says he hadn't even looked to the right or to the left at all. He hadn't bothered looking before. He says like, "Oh, I don't know where I'm at." The thing about not liking that the usher was behind him, because he feels like he's pushing him along as he was the guy under arrest. I mean, clearly he's not being arrested. This is like K assuming and therefore arresting himself in the situation. Nobody's got him bound, either physically or in any external binds whatsoever. Like, nobody's held him down on anything. He just assumes things and basically arrests himself. Another case in which like he was offered already, because he didn't think of this himself. Hey, wouldn't you like to see the court? Seeing as he's so interested in the court, despite his lies to himself that he really isn't. He realized, no, yes, I actually want to know. He goes in, finds it very weird and uncomfortable, and immediately wants to get out. And he said, the usher tells him, "Well, you haven't seen everything." He's like, "Well, I don't want to see everything." Yet again, he's being offered to look into how the court works to some extent, and he refuses. He's being allowed to look into how the law works to some extent, and he refuses. Another thing, yet again, K being selfish and putting himself as the center of the universe, in which he's like, I want to leave, and you better come with me now. And the guy's like, okay, well, fine, if you want to leave, I got business to do, let me go get it done, and then we can go back together. And he says, no, it's got to be right now. Completely nonsensical when you think about it. And yet this is completely something that you do notice people do all the fucking time in real life, unfortunately. The other thing is, he complains about, he makes a ruckus. Yes, let me see. Kay had still not looked around at anything at all in the room where he found himself, and it was only when the doors opened, a woman came out. Came with the usher. He had, after all, said that no one would take any notice of Kay, and now there were two people coming. Yeah, nobody took notice of him until he made a ruckus. Because what is it? When he was offered to go look, and he's like, "Am I even allowed to look?" He's like, "Yeah, nobody's gonna care." One, he wasn't told that he wasn't allowed, and he said nobody would notice him, and indeed nobody did notice him until he made a fuss about things. And then he's surprised, like, "Oh, he said nobody would notice me." Well, yeah. I mean, this is on the level of stupidity of, Alex Jones spending years talking shit about that one school shooting being fake.
Sandy Hook.
And then being surprised that he's being sued, that he was actually sued successfully about defamation. I mean, what are you surprised about? Oh no, I'm acting like a weirdo. People are now coming to see. You told me nobody was going to care. Yeah, nobody cares if you're a normal person. think that's... oh yeah, another thing is, well, it's going to come up in the next paragraph as well, so it's not a big spoiler, but the fact that he's acting weird, and it says, he started feeling tired all of a sudden. He hasn't gone very far. It's already one of the signs that he's within a domain in which, as the kind of being that he is, he does not properly belong there. He's not spiritually acclimated to that. He's we'll see how this plays out. So continuing. But he must have seemed very odd standing there in silence, and the young woman and the usher were indeed looking at him as if they thought he would go through some major metamorphosis at any time. He would go through some major metamorphosis any second, which they didn't want to miss seeing. Let me just read that whole sentence. But he must have seemed very odd standing there in silence, and the young woman and the usher were indeed looking at him as if they thought he would go through some major metamorphosis any second, which they didn't want to miss seeing. And in the doorway stood the man whom Kay had noticed in the background earlier. He held firmly onto the beam above the low door, swinging a little on the tips of his feet, as if becoming impatient as he watched. But the young woman was the first to recognize that Kay's behavior was caused by his feeling slightly unwell. She brought a chair and asked, "Would you not like to sit down?" Kay sat down immediately, and in order to keep his place better, put his elbows on the armrest. You're a little bit dizzy, aren't you?" she asked him. Her face was now close in front of him. It bore the severe expression that many young women have just when they're in the bloom of their youth. "It's nothing for you to worry about," she said. "That's nothing unusual here. Almost everyone gets an attack like that the first time they come here." "This is your first time, is it?" "Yes, it's nothing unusual then. The sun burns down on the roof, and the hot wood makes the air so thick and heavy, it makes this place rather unsuitable for offices, whatever other advantages they might offer. But the air is almost impossible to breathe on days when there's a lot of business, and that's almost every day. And when you think that there's a lot of washing put out to dry here as well, and we can't stop the tenants doing that, it's not surprising you start to feel unwell. But you get used to the air all right in the end. But you're here for the second or third time. When you're here for the second or third time, you'll hardly notice how oppressive the air is. Are you feeling any better now?" Kay made no answer. He felt too embarrassed at being put at the mercy of these people by his sudden weakness, and learning the reason for feeling ill made him feel not better, but a little worse. The girl noticed it straight away, and to make the air fresher for Kay, she took a window pole that was leaning against a wall and pushed open a small hatch directly above Kay's head that led to the outside. But so much soot fell in that the girl had to immediately close the hatch again and clean the soot off Kay's hand with her handkerchief, as Kay was too tired to do that for himself. He would have liked just to sit quietly where he was until he had enough strength to leave, and the less fuss people made about him, the sooner that would be. But then the girl said, "You can't stay here. We're in people's way here." Kay looked at her as if to ask whose way they were impeding. "If you like, I can take you to the sick room." And turning to the man in the doorway said, "Please help me." The man immediately came over to them, but Kay did not want to go to the sick room. That was just what he wanted to avoid, being led further from place to place. The further he went, the more difficult it must become. So he said, "I am able to walk now," and stood up, shaking after becoming used to sitting so comfortably. But then he was unable to stay upright. "I can't manage it," he said, shaking his head, and sat down with a sigh. He remembered the usher who, despite everything, would have been able to lead him out of there, but who seemed to have gone long before. Kay looked out between the man and the young woman who were standing in front of him, but was unable to find the usher. "I think," said the man, who was elegantly dressed and whose appearance was made especially impressive with a grey waistcoat that had two long, sharply tailored points, "the gentleman is feeling unwell because of the atmosphere here, so the best thing, and what he would most prefer, would be not to take him to the sick room, but get him out of the offices altogether." "That's right," exclaimed Kay. with such joy that he nearly interrupted what the man was saying. I'm sure that will make me feel better straight away. I'm really not that weak. All I need is a little support under my arms. I won't cause you much trouble. It's not such a long way anyway. Lead me to the door and then I'll sit on the stairs for a while and soon recover, as I don't suffer from attacks like this at all. I'm surprised at it myself. I also work in an office and am quite used to office air, but here it seems to be too strong. You said so yourselves. Please be so kind as to help me on my way a little. I'm feeling dizzy, you see, and it'll make me ill if I stand up by myself. And with that he raised his shoulders to make it easier for the two of them to take him by the arms. So, they give a physical explanation for why, the air is kind of off-putting here. But I think it's also just a very good metaphor that this place has an atmosphere that is quite different to his own. He's from the worldly atmosphere, and this is more of a lawful, divine atmosphere. Yet again, as you can see, the officials of the court are very nice to him, very thoughtful, whereas all he spends in his mind is thinking about how crummy they all are and how awful they are and how he doesn't want them around him and how he despises that they're helping him, and here he is like, oh, please help me. Hypocrite much. The man, however, didn't follow this suggestion, but just stood there with his hands on his trouser pockets and laughed out loud. There, you see, he said to the girl. I was quite right. The gentleman is only unwell here, and not in general. The young woman smiled too, but lightly tapped the man's arm with the tips of her fingers as if he had allowed himself too much fun with Kay. So what do you think, then? Said the man, still laughing. I really don't want to lead the gentleman out of here. Oh, I really do want to lead the gentleman out of here. That's all right then, said the girl, briefly inclining her charming head. Don't worry too much about him, laughing, said the girl to Kay, who had become unhappy once more and stared quietly in front of himself, as if needing no further explanation. This gentleman, may I introduce you? The man gave his permission with a wave of the hand. So this gentleman's job is to give out information. He gives all the information they need to people who are waiting. As our court and offices are not very well known among the public, he gets asked for quite a lot. He has an answer for every question. You can try him out if you feel like it. But that's not his only distinction. His other distinction is his elegance of dress. We, that's to say all of us who work in the offices here, we decided that the information giver would have to be elegantly dressed as he continually has to deal with the litigants. And he's the first one they meet, so he needs to give a dignified first impression. The rest of us, I'm afraid, as you can see just by looking at me, dress very badly and old-fashioned, and there's not much point in spending much on clothes anyway, as we hardly ever leave the offices. We even sleep here. But as I said, we decided that the information giver would have to have nice clothes. As the management here is rather peculiar in this respect, and they would get them for us, we had a collection. Some of the litigants contributed too, and bought him these lovely clothes and some others besides. So everything would be ready for him to give a good impression, except that he spoils it again by laughing and frightening people. That's how it is, said the man, mocking her. But I don't understand why it is that you're explaining all our intimate facts to the gentleman, or rather why it is that you're pressing them on him, as I'm sure he's not all interested. Just look at him sitting there. It's clear he's occupied with his own affairs. Kay just did not feel like contradicting him. The girl's intention may have been good. Perhaps she was under instructions to distract him or to give him the chance to collect himself, but the attempt had not worked. I had to explain to him why you were laughing, said the girl. I suppose it was insulting. I think he would forgive even the worst of insults if I finally took him outside. Kay said nothing, did not even look up. He tottered, the two of them negotiating over him like an object that was even what suited him best. But suddenly he felt the information giver's hand on one arm and the young woman's hand on the other. Up you get then, weakling, said the information giver. Thank you both very much, said Kay, pleasantly surprised as he slowly rose and personally guided these unfamiliar hands to the places where he most needed support. So his clothes, obviously have significance. One, the fact that he looks fancy, significance enough itself. I don't know if the design has any significance. I'm actually not quite sure what he looks like. What is that he's described on? Let's see, with a gray waistcoat that had two long, sharply tailored points. What does that look like? Let me see. Waistcoat. Oh, okay, so it was what I was kind of thinking of. It had two long, sharply tailored points. I wonder if that's downward points or the points at which the sides of the vest meet and you button them together. Would make sense more if it was just kind of the button portion. Anyways, yet again, a sign of the humbleness of the court, how little it cares about material things. But as far as we've noticed, they give great service. They are very, very malleable and thoughtful of how best to make proceedings as convenient for defendants as possible. And the fact that, they've led him into the court offices, nobody says anything, he makes a scene, they help him out, and then, yet again, he didn't go and ask about this, they offer it to him, to let him know, here's a guy who can answer any questions that you might have, would you like to ask him anything? And yet again, he turns it down. And just so you know, never again in the book does he ever go back and ask to talk to this guy. Ever. Now the way the way Kay sees this guy is oh, he's rude, he's mocking me, and he's laughing. And they're well, he's nicely dressed, he makes a great impression, but, he laughs at the defendants. They take that as rude. Well, it's not exactly clear that he's laughing at them, though I don't doubt that he probably is. But it's not that kind of laugh of ha, you idiots, fuck you. It's that kind of laugh of you're dealing with somebody who's being foolish in a very obvious way, and you know that even if you told them, they just wouldn't accept what you're telling them, so it's kind of pointless. So are you just gonna stoically take this, or are you just gonna act like nothing's going on, or or do you show a little bit of humanity and just kind of laugh it off a little bit? And the guy can tell, oh, he doesn't even want information. He's that's why I find it funny. This is not his first rodeo. He's seen this before. All of them have seen this before. Let's see, what was it? So as they approached the corridor, the girl said quietly into Kay's ear, I must seem to think it's very important to show the information giver in good light, but you shouldn't doubt what I say. I just want to say the truth. He isn't hard-hearted. It's not really his job to help litigants outside if they're unwell, but he's doing it anyway, as you can see. I don't suppose any of us is hard-hearted. Perhaps we'd all like to be helpful, but working for the court offices isn't easy. But working for the court offices, it's easy for us to give the impression we are hard-hearted and don't want to help anyone. It makes me quite sad. Would you not like to sit down here for a while? Asked the information giver. They were already in the. They were all. Okay, yeah, that's just a typo. Let me read that.
Yeah.
It makes me quite sad. Would you not like to sit down here for a while? Asked the information giver. They were already in the corridor and just in front of the defendant whom Kay had spoken to earlier. Kay felt almost ashamed to be seen by him. Earlier he had stood so upright in front of him, and now he had to be supported by two others. His hat was held up by the information giver, balanced on outstretched fingers. His hair was disheveled and hung down onto the sweat of his forehead. But the defendant seemed to notice nothing of what was going on and just stood there humbly, as if wanting to apologize to the information giver for being there. The information giver looked past him. I know, he said, that my case can't be settled today, not yet, but I've come in anyway. I thought I could wait here anyway. It's Sunday today, I've got plenty of time, and I'm not disturbing anyone here. There's no need to be so apologetic, said the information giver. It's very commendable for you to be so attentive. You are taking up space here when you don't need to, but as long as you don't get in my way, I will do nothing to stop you from following the progress of your case as closely as you like. When one has seen so many people who shamefully neglect their cases, one learns to show patience with people like you. Do sit down. He's very good with litigants, whispered the girl. Kay nodded, but started to move off again when the information giver repeated. Would you not like to sit down here for a while? No, said Kay. I don't want to rest. He had said that as decisively as he could, but in fact it would have done him a lot of good to sit down. It was as if he were suffering seasickness. He felt as if he were on a ship in a rough sea, as if the water were hitting against the wooden walls, a thundering from the depths of the corridor, as if the torrent were crashing over it, as if the corridor were swaying and the waiting litigants on each side of its rising and sinking. It made the calmness of the girl and the man leading him all the more incomprehensible. He was at their mercy. If they let go of him, he would fall like a board. Their little eyes glanced here and there. Kay could feel the evenness of their steps, but could not do the same, as from step to step he was virtually being carried. He finally noticed they were speaking to him, but he did not understand them. All he heard was a noise that filled all the space, and through which there seemed to be an unchanging higher note, sounding like a siren. Louder, he whispered with his head sunk low, ashamed at having it to ask him to speak louder when he knew they had spoken loudly enough, even if it had been for him incomprehensible. At last, a draught of cool air blew in his face as if a gap had been torn out in the wall in front of him, and next to him he heard someone say, "First he says he wants to go, and then you can tell him 100 times that this is the way out, and he doesn't move." Kay became aware that he was standing in front of the way out, and that the young woman had opened the door. It seemed to him that all his strength returned to him at once, and to get a foretaste of freedom, he stepped straight onto one of the stairs and took his leave there of his companions, who bowed to him. "Thank you very much," he repeated, shook their hands once more, and did not let go until he thought he saw that they found it hard to bear the comparatively fresh air from the stairway after being so long used to the air of the offices. They were hardly able to reply, and the young woman might even have fallen over if Kay had not shut the door extremely fast. Kay then stood still for a while, combed his hair with the help of a pocket mirror, picked up his hat from the next stair. The information giver must have thrown it down there, and then he ran down the steps, so fresh and in such long leaps that the contrast with his previous state nearly frightened him. His normal sturdy state of health had never prepared him for surprises such as this. Did his body want to revolt and cause him a new trial as he was bearing the old one with such little effort? He did not quite reject the idea that he should see a doctor the next time he had the chance. But whatever he did, and this was something of which he could advise himself, he wanted to spend all Sunday mornings in the future better than he had spent this one. Alright, that's the end of that chapter. Not much to say. Yet again, constantly the court is going out of its way, its officials are going out of the way to be very nice to him, to offer him all the help that he could possibly want. Which throughout the book he complains that he's never gotten any help, that they're stonewalling him at every turn, that, it's inscrutable.
And the readers
blah, blah, blah.
believe it.
Exactly. It's the weirdest thing. This is the most bizarre thing. I thought the first time I read it, I thought that the key to understanding this book, it's not a spoiler. It's very famous. Like, to spoil this book is like nearly impossible. You'd be spoiled a book forever if you even ever heard of it. There's a famous chapter called "The Parable of the Law."
Before the law.
Yeah, before the law.
It's a parable, but yeah, it's called.
Yeah, it's a parable. Now, I think that if you're strangely an abstract thinker who does not pay attention to existential things, that's probably the chapter that saves you, because it becomes a key that allows you to see what was invisible before. And at first I thought, and this is not actually a rare reading at all, as far as I'm aware. That a lot of people do notice that this chapter is the key. What interpretation they take from it is another thing. This time, I can't say that I believe this anymore. I think that if that chapter was taken out, you could still deduce sorry. Excuse me. You could still deduce from what Kay says and from what he does what the trial is ultimately about. That it is about who he is, that everything is definitely not in the way that it seems to him, and that the way that he talks about it. So I think it's a very important chapter. I no longer can say that it's the key chapter. It seems to me that the whole story is very well designed and works itself out in such a way that every chapter, as such, seems to hold enough of the portion of the keys that the key can be found in just about any chapter if you're looking for it. And I don't think that you really have to look for it very hard. Ultimately, it is surprising the more we're going through this that people completely miss this. Anyways, the fact that they get out of the office, Kay feels perfectly fine again, but then the office people don't feel fine. Then they become the ones who start feeling sick. As far as I'm aware, in mystical literature, this is fairly normal. It is a common account that just as we feel very out of place if directly physically transported into a higher domain, so to speak, likewise beings from higher domains feel a similar kind of like difficulty of navigating our world and being in it. Not usually described as a sickness, but described as that it takes them a lot of effort to, what would you say?
Matter.
Yeah, to inhabit matter. For them it's it's said often it's described as densities. It's too dense for them. They are far lighter beings.
Yeah.
And it's not only about density. It's the lightness of being not only correspond. It's not only being spoken of like in a physical sense of a denseness, though there is a sense of that. It's also a spiritual sense that they are lighter and they're quicker, so that they feel it. It's really annoying to them to have to talk and communicate with us because they have to slow down a lot.
Right.
Because like imagine like the way we speak, and you have me speak with a being that can comprehend only at a speed of like 1/100th of the way you speak. Imagine having to slow down your speech to that, and imagine that your thought is already so much faster than that, and like having to slow down your thought to match the speech is just a torture.
Yes. Giorgiani talked about this in the video he made on the trial, which is now unlisted, so I don't know if the listeners could find it. But it's a good supplement for what we're saying, I would say. Even though there's some stuff that I don't necessarily disagree with, but I don't think is 100% intended by Kafka. It's still worth listening to that or engaging with that.
It's definitely one of the more interesting interpretations. Way better than any like other like interpretation you'll find. Like, oh, it's just about a bureaucracy of the state. Yeah.
Right. There's a lot he gets right, and he talks about this a lot. He even goes into the fact that beings going higher, up the eternal ladder of ascension toward the throne of God, or whatever you want to call it, it gets harder and harder for you to get there because of how pure it is. The impurity of your soul can't handle that level. So it's the opposite. The opposite is true, I guess, as well as what you're saying. That divine beings, or the higher beings, cannot inhabit this world for long, or like temporarily, I guess, or it's difficult for them, so they just choose not to. So they come in, talk to Ezekiel or whatever, and then bounce.
Yeah, because like the material world is just I mean, you and I have we've listened to so much of this stuff and read quite a bit of it. What's the other one? I mean, like, what is it in Steiner? Like the whole thing, like for example, like the amount of like purification it takes to align the material world to create bodies that can handle the soul of a higher being is intense. Like it's incredibly long. Like at least for Casey and Steiner, for example, the development so that Jesus, for example, could incarnate literally goes from the beginning of mankind. It's literally a eugenic process. It's this is a big part of mystery schools. We think eugenics is a very new thing. Technically, it's like an ancient thing. It's just nobody talked about genetics or anything. But the idea of like a bloodline for certain purposes, particularly about like because one of the interesting things about mystery schools and occult teachings is they have always been the ones who, unlike modern stuff like New Age, in New Age it is just assumed that anybody could become a Buddha, or anybody could just engage in spiritual exercise. Just try it, man. Anybody can do it. Anybody can talk to angels. No, in the mystery schools it's like, no, not anybody can talk to angels. Certain people have certain bodily developments which other peoples don't have. They are quite literally higher evolved. So imagine somebody a group of people consciously evolving a human body so that a certain higher being could finally incarnate fully. Because higher beings can incarnate partially, but that's no good. Because since the majority of their soul has to remain in the other part of the world, they kind of come here and all they have is a fraction of who they are, and they don't have any of the possess. They don't have any of the woo, as they call it now. But if you want a real Jesus, you want the man who makes the miracles, you got to get a supercharged body.
Right.
And even then, the body is just a body, and it only lasts so long.
This is getting a bit too esoteric out there, but it's related. But
It's just kind of going to the tangent of
everything's interrelated.
the people of the court are a bit higher on the spiritual echelon, so they're not exactly the same kind of beings that we are.
Right, but I would say not that much higher in the grand.
No, yeah, they're not much higher.
They're not the high ones,
Yeah, it's made very clear. Yeah, it's made very clear that these people are definitely not divine beings. They're real people in the world. They move along.
We'll get to the high ones at some point.
Yeah, and I mean, it is talked about a little bit. So there's a big pointer about like the real divine beings, but just like the fact that they're closer to the law, they're less materialistic. They're less part of the outside world, and they're more of the inner world. That's the big takeaway there. That's what that metaphor is. Other thing to comment on is, yet again, Kay comes along the man that he abused and assaulted earlier, looks at him, says he feels ashamed that he's seen by him in this state of weakness. He does not feel ashamed that he assaulted this guy with no provocation. He does not apologize to this guy. But, on the other flip side, the other guy is just like so out of it as well that he doesn't even notice Kay. He just notices the one guy he's there for, which is the information giver. He says, well, I'm sorry, I'm here, I'm taking space, but, I'm not bothering anybody. And he's like, fine, whatever. And notice that the information giver tells him, like, you don't have to be here. You're not doing anything here. You are wasting space. But so long as you don't bother anybody, what am I going to do? You want to follow your trial, like, at least you care, unlike somebody.
Yeah.
Unlike other people. So to that extent, we find that commendable, and, we tolerate you. And, that's just what it is. It says, like, there's no need to be self-apologetic. It's very commendable for you to be so attentive. You're taking up space here when you don't need to, but as long as you don't get in my way, I will do nothing to stop you from following the proximity as close as you like. When one has seen so many people shamelessly neglect their cases, one learns to show patience with people like you. Do sit down. So, he knows that there's no reason that this person ought to be there. Like, they're not helping their case. But the fact that they're doing something, despite the fact that it's not ultimately doing much of anything, is commendable. What's the big metaphor here? To me, these people who just spend their entire days obsessed with their trial is the stereotypical person who has a spiritual crisis and has their come to the Lord, come to Jesus moment in which they become hyper-religious.
Mm-hmm.
But they become so extremely formally.
It's an abstraction.
In which, like, they're like, the Bible says this, and I'm just going to do this. And, the Bible says I can't eat pork, or I can't eat shrimp. I don't know what the hell it says, like abominations, whatever. All those things. It's and I think everybody knows somebody like that. I've known plenty of people like that.
Right.
Eventually they mellow out at some point. Although for some of them it takes quite a few years. And they're like, I finally fear for my soul, and I just want to make sure I go to heaven. And all they do is just worry about the rule book. They're constant, like, they're not in it. They're annoying because they're not only obsessed with that themselves for themselves. They usually make sure that that they're into that, and they're constantly trying to save you because, like, well, the book tells me I got to do this. Those people are extremely mistaken. Often they're terrible people as well. But the fact that they care, that they've had a little moment of awakening of, like, this is important, the trial is important, I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do, but I'm trying to do something, And here is this, this thing that tells me that there's a process, and I'm trying to figure out where I am in that process, and I'm obsessing about this process. Every little day, I'm trying to see what it is that I'm doing wrong. What might like God be looking down on me for? What might I be like called out in the sins in the day of judgment? Blah blah blah. At least they're doing that much. So this is a case of like people who understand these people could do much better, but at least they're trying something. That in itself is commendable. Okay, well, anyways, we finished that chapter. I don't think there's much else to say, so we will see you next time and continue on with chapter 4. Goodbye.